Near the end of the second season of Breaking Bad, Walter White lets a young woman choke to death on her own vomit while he stands there and watches, and when I saw it, I remember thinking, not how could he, but he had to. She was a threat, she was blackmailing him, she was dragging Jesse down with her, and it was her or the work. He had to. Here's the problem with that, though. It isn't an observation, it's a defence. And I wasn't defending Jane Margulis, a young woman 18 months sober, who relapsed and wanted to take the money and get clean somewhere far away. I was defending the man who watched her die. Nobody asked me to. No character argues Walt's case in that scene. There's no music telling me what to feel, and the camera simply holds on Bryan Cranston's face as it moves through horror, then calculation, then something that looks almost like peace. Somewhere in the dark I did the rest, building his defence myself, brick by brick, for free. I don't think I'm alone in that. Because for 5 seasons, millions of people watched a man poison a child, dissolve bodies in acid, order 10 men murdered in prison, and destroy every single life that touched his, and many of us still found ourselves defending him, not despite knowing better, but while knowing better. Vince Gilligan pitched Breaking Bad with one famous sentence. This is a show that takes Mr. Chips and turns him into Scarface. It's the most repeated line about the series, the accepted summary, the thing everyone knows. A good man transformed, step by step, into a monster, while we watch the transformation happen. I think it's wrong. I don't think the show builds a monster at all. I think everything that makes Walter White dangerous, the pride and the grievance and the hunger, is already sitting in plain sight in the man we meet in the pilot, and we're going to look at it. What the show does across 5 seasons isn't creation, it's enlargement, because season by season it hands those traits more room, more power, and more permission, revealing what was underneath the sweater the whole time. But that's only half the machine, because while Walt's capacity grows, something else grows right alongside it, step for step and rung for rung, moving from decent to monstrous, exactly the way Gilligan promised. And that transformation wasn't happening on the screen, it was happening in front of it. Breaking Bad trains its audience to do one thing, which is to reason like Walter White, to take each enlargement, each new body and each new lie, and translate it into necessity, building his defence ourselves, one forgiveness at a time. The way it does this is written into everything. The camera, the structure, and the one character everybody hated. So this is not really a video about Walter White. It's about what the show did to us while we watched him. Forget the underwear, forget the RV in the desert, the gas mask and the gun pointed at the sirens, because the most important scene in the pilot of Breaking Bad happens at a car wash. Walter White, 50 years old, high school chemistry teacher, is on his hands and knees wiping the wheels of a sports car that belongs to one of his own students, a kid who spent that afternoon mocking him in class and filming him for laughs. The student looks down at his teacher, crouched over the hubcaps, and makes sure his girlfriend gets a picture. The scene is staged as humiliation, and it is won, but watch Walt's face, because what's there isn't sadness and it isn't defeat, it's fury. That distinction is everything, because the entire mythology of Breaking Bad rests on a before and after. Before, a gentle, beaten-down family man. After, a monster the world made. The cancer diagnosis is supposed to be the dividing line, the event that breaks him bad, but the pilot, watched honestly, refuses to cooperate with that story. It doesn't show us a good man about to be corrupted. It shows us a proud man who has spent 20 years swallowing rage being handed a reason to stop swallowing. Look at what's already there before the diagnosis. There's the party at his brother-in-law's where Hank waves Walt's own birthday attention away and takes over the room, handing Walt his gun like a toy given to a child, and Walt holds it with a strange, lingering interest the show does nothing to underline. There's the classroom, where he lectures about chemistry as the study of change, of growth and decay and transformation, a speech everyone reads as foreshadowing, but which is delivered by a man for whom nothing has changed in decades. And that's precisely the wound. And there's the marriage, where a birthday handjob is administered with one eye on a laptop auction, while Walt lies there like a man attending his own life as a guest. Then there's the deepest cut, the one the show holds back for a few episodes but plants in the pilot's bones, which is grey matter. It's the company Walt co-founded as a young man, the research that became a multi-billion-dollar empire. And he sold his share for $5,000 and has spent every year since watching his former partner and his former girlfriend live the life he believes was stolen from him. Believes, because across 5 seasons the show is remarkably careful never to confirm Walt's version of that story. We hear his bitterness, but we never see the theft. This is the origin of Walter White, and it predates the cancer by 2 decades. A man certain he is the smartest person in every room, certain the world failed to pay him what he was owed, and certain, this is the crucial part, that his decency was the price he paid. He was good, and look what it got him. A car wash, a laptop auction, and a gun in his hand that isn't his. The criminal world also catches his eye before the diagnosis, not after it. At that same birthday party, watching Hank's meth bust on the news, Walt's first question is how much money was in the room. And it's Walt who asks to come along on a ride-along. The curiosity is already there, and the cancer simply converts it into urgency, so that days after the diagnosis he's standing at a raid, spotting Jesse through a windshield and recognizing an industry where his neglected abilities might finally be worth something, and shortly after that he's blackmailing a former student into partnership and cooking crystal methamphetamine in his underwear with the calm of a man doing exactly what he always wanted. The show tells you this out loud too. When Jesse, the actual criminal, asks him why he's doing this, why now, why break bad, Walt's answer isn't about money at all. It's 2 words: I am awake. Not I am dying, but awake. The cancer isn't a cause, it's a permission slip, because a man with months to live no longer has to pretend the rage isn't there. And in case there's any doubt, the show runs the experiment for us. In episode 5, Walt's rich former partners offer him a way out, a job at grey matter with real work and real dignity and health insurance that will cover everything, the best treatment in the country, his family saved and his pride intact with no crime required. It is a complete solution to every problem the show has established, and Walt says no. Think about what that no means for the Mr. Chips story, because a desperate good man forced into crime to save his family would take that offer in a heartbeat. Walt refuses it, refuses charity from the people he resents, and chooses the meth lab instead, so the family man justification dies right there in episode 5 of season 1, and the show simply lets it die quietly, because it knows most of us won't notice. We've already signed on. Here's the part I find funny, which is that the world underestimated this show almost exactly the way it underestimated its protagonist. Breaking Bad was a famously difficult sell, since the premise of a dying teacher cooking meth was considered borderline unsellable, and the network that finally took it didn't want Bryan Cranston at all. To executives, he was the goofy dad from Malcolm in the Middle, and they pushed for established movie stars instead, so Gilligan had to fight for him on the strength of a single X-Files episode, where Cranston had played a dying, hateful man the audience somehow still couldn't look away from, which in hindsight was the whole job description. Then the writers' strike cut the first season from 9 episodes to 7, and the original plan for that first season had included killing off Jesse Pinkman. The shortened season interrupted that plan, and by the time the question came back around, Aaron Paul's performance had convinced Gilligan that killing Jesse would destroy one of the strongest relationships the show had. So the series stopped being a solo portrait and became a two-hander, meaning a real piece of its moral architecture owes its existence to an accident of timing. So the pilot leaves us with a problem, because the raw material of the monster, the pride and the grievance and the hunger, is installed from the first frame. What the next 5 seasons give Walt isn't a new nature, it's capacity, money, power, a name, and room to act on what was always there, and every time that capacity grows, someone has to decide it's still forgivable. That job went to us. He was humiliated, and he deserved better. That was our first defence, and we'd barely met him. Now count the eyes you borrow in Breaking Bad. You've seen the shots, even if you never registered them. The view from inside a shovel as it digs, from inside a Roomba circling a party's wreckage, from the bottom of a barrel as money rains in, from inside the fryer, the tub, the trunk, and the ATM. Breaking Bad is famous for putting its camera inside objects, and it became the show's visual signature. The thing every parody reached for first. It's usually explained as style, as energy, as a show refusing to look boring, which is fair enough, because those shots do a lot of different things. Sometimes they're a joke, sometimes they're pure showmanship, and sometimes they're a way of making a routine scene strange again. But notice their most consistent address, because again and again the object hosting the camera is a tool of the work, the digging, the cooking, the hiding, the counting. Whatever else those shots are doing, they keep placing you inside the operation, looking out at the world the way the crime does. And that's the smallest version of a trick the show plays at every level. Film theorists sometimes break audience sympathy into layers, because it isn't one switch, it's a structure. Murray Smith describes it as the difference between alignment, meaning whose experience the story attaches you to and whose knowledge you share, and allegiance, meaning who you actually root for morally. The two are supposed to be separate, and you can be aligned with a character while still judging him. Breaking Bad is a 5-season demonstration of how alignment, held long enough, quietly becomes allegiance. Look at the asymmetry, because Walt gets everything. We share his secrets from minute 1, and every lie he tells we know is a lie, which makes every family dinner a scene about his jeopardy rather than their deception. We get his memories, his fantasies, and his silences, so that when he stares at nothing, the show waits with him, and we fill the pause with his thoughts because they're the only thoughts we've been given. Now ask what Skylar gets. She isn't a blank, since she has private moments, suspicions, and her own small investigations, but she receives far less sustained interior access than Walt, especially across those first 2 seasons, and the difference in kind is the point. We hear his justifications in his own voice, from within the walls of his reasoning, while we mostly see her objections from outside, across the kitchen counter, and watch how those scenes actually play. In the first season, when she confronts him about the second cell phone, about the lies she can smell but can't name, we already hold every answer she's digging for, so her questions can't function as questions for us. She's excavating a secret we've been trusted with, which means the scene's tension isn't whether she'll learn the truth, it's whether he'll get caught. The show has made her pursuit of the truth feel like a threat to it. This is not an accident of writing one character better than another, it's the structure of sympathy, aimed. And then there's the suspense itself, the thing everyone praises Breaking Bad for, the unbearable tension. But tension is never neutral. Hitchcock's old bomb Under the Table works because the audience knows what the characters don't. And that knowledge creates an allegiance, since you want the people at the table to be safe. Now run Breaking Bad through that machine and ask who has the secret, which is Walt, and who is approaching the table, which is Hank, the DEA, the truth. Watch it work in one scene. In Season 3, Hank has tracked the RV, the rolling meth lab, and the physical evidence of everything to a junkyard, with Walt and Jesse trapped inside. He walks the perimeter, he tries the door, and for several excruciating minutes the show wrings tension out of a piece of sheet metal standing between a DEA agent and the truth. It is one of the most acclaimed sequences in the series, and I want you to be honest about what your body was doing during it, because every muscle wanted that door to hold. A good man doing his job closing in on a mass-scale drug operation, and the scene is constructed beat by beat so that his success would land as catastrophe. When Walt engineers the fake phone call that tells Hank his wife is dying, a cruelty with real consequences, since Hank assaults Jesse afterward, loses his badge and gun, and later faces the cousins unarmed, the dominant feeling in the room is relief. So when your pulse spikes, because Hank is getting warm, because the GPS is on the car or the book is in the bathroom, ask yourself what you're actually afraid of. Hank getting close to what exactly? To justice, to the answer, to the thing that in any sane moral universe you should be cheering toward the finish line, and you're sweating. That's not a reaction the show tricked out of you with one scene. That's 50 hours of alignment doing exactly what alignment does. And no, Walt isn't the only place to stand, since Jesse becomes a real centre of gravity, and so does Hank eventually, and so does Mike, because the show does offer other chairs. But it built the room around one of them, since Walt's secrets are the ones we keep, and Walt's jeopardy is the engine of nearly every scene, while the alternatives arrive late, partial, and always in his orbit. Suspense made you an accomplice, because suspense only works if you have a side, and one side had a 50-hour head start. Even the cold opens, the show's most celebrated structural device, are aimed the same way. There's the pink teddy bear falling into the pool with one eye melted, spread across an entire season of flash forwards, and there's the machine gun in the trunk on Walt's 52nd birthday. These are promises of catastrophe, and they generate dread. But ask yourself dread for whom? Because the teddy bear teaches you to fear a disaster arriving at Walt's house, and the machine gun teaches you to fear the day Walt is cornered. The show's entire architecture of anticipation is built around his survival, so that even the punishments, when they finally land as his tragedies. As the seasons pass, watch how the camera's grammar around him changes. Season 1 shoots Walt at eye level, cramped in frames and squeezed by furniture and family, but by the time Heisenberg has a name in the streets, the camera has started kneeling. Look at the desert meeting in Season 5, where he tells a rival to say his name, with Walt framed from below, hat on and sky behind him, shot like a monument being introduced, and then put it next to the famous crawl space shot at the end of Season 4, where Walt is at his absolute lowest, broke and cornered and laughing like something has snapped, and the camera goes to the ceiling, straight down from God's height, staring at a man in a hole shaped like a grave. At key moments, the lens tracks his perceived power like a gauge, kneeling when he rises and staring down from above when he's on the floor. The show is not being seduced by him, it's rendering our seduction visible, giving the audience's growing awe a lens height. Here's the thing I want to be precise about, because this is where most complicity arguments go soft. The camera never asks you to forgive Walter White, and there's no scene where the show argues his innocence, because what the camera does is quieter and much more effective than that. It makes judging him feel like a chore, and understanding him feel like watching. You can't spend 50 hours behind a man's eyes and stay neutral, since neutrality takes effort, and the show has arranged for all the effort to point the other way. It was them or him. That was our second defense, and the camera wrote it. We just signed. In August 2013, as Breaking Bad's final episodes were airing, the New York Times published an op-ed by an actress, and it wasn't about craft, and it wasn't about the ending. It was about hatred that had started following her off the screen. Anna Gunn, who played Skylar White, wrote about discovering entire online communities organised around hating her character, and about how easily that hatred slid from the character to the woman who played her. She described a post that talked about wanting to kill Skylar, and wondered where the line was between that sentence and one about her. She had gone looking for an explanation of why a fictional wife had become, in her words, a lightning rod, and found that the hatred said less about her performance than about what audiences needed Skylar to be. Sit with the shape of that for a second, because this is a show about a man who poisons a child, and the character who received organised, personal, overflowing hatred was his wife. If this video has a single piece of evidence, it's that. Think about who Skylar White actually is in the plain text of the show. She is the person who notices something is wrong before anyone else, who asks the questions a sane person would ask, and who, when she finally learns the truth, does the reasonable things. Demands he stop, files for divorce, keeps his crimes from her children. She is, for long stretches, the only character whose read on Walter White is simply accurate, since she sees the pride and she sees the lying underneath the lying. And in the third season she tells him, in so many words, that someone has to protect this family from the man who protects this family. Let's be precise here though, because the argument doesn't need a saint and shouldn't pretend it has one. Skylar is not clean, since she eventually lies, launders money, builds the car wash into a rinsing machine for meth profits, hands Ted Benake $600,000 to bury a problem, and helps preserve the very structure she's terrified of. That complicity is real, and the show charges her for it. But notice when it begins, which is after Walt has already wrapped the family in consequences he created, when every exit she reaches for, the divorce and the lawyer and the truth, begins carrying a cost she cannot bring herself to impose on her children. Her lawyer tells her plainly to report him. Take the kids and leave, and she can't, because Walt doesn't make leaving impossible, he makes it unbearable. Her corruption is downstream of his, and here's the uncomfortable part. Her compromises never bought her an ounce of the audience's forgiveness, while his purchased empires of it. We forgave the architect and convicted the hostage. She is the show's designated witness, the mirror held up next to Walt, so the audience can check its reflection, and the audience smashed it. Why? The standard answer is misogyny, and the standard answer is not wrong, since Gunn herself connected the vitriol to what audiences expect wives on television to be, and the sheer gendered vocabulary of the hate speaks for itself. But misogyny alone doesn't explain the mechanism, meaning why this show, this character, and this intensity, and for that you have to see what Skylar does to the viewing experience the show has constructed. Everything we covered in the last section, the alignment and the borrowed eyes, and the suspense that made us guard Walt's secret like it was ours, Skylar interrupts all of it. Every scene where she pushes back is a scene where the fantasy stalls, where the empire pauses and the fun stops, so that structurally, not morally but structurally, she is positioned as the obstacle between the audience and the show they tuned in for. And 50 hours of alignment have taught us exactly what to feel about obstacles. The critic Emily Nussbaum, watching this play out in real time, described this kind of viewer as the bad fan, meaning the viewer who takes a critique and receives it as a celebration, who watches a show about the rot inside an anti-hero and comes away simply cheering the anti-hero. Her point wasn't that these viewers weren't paying attention, it's that they were watching a different show, the show the surface offers, and Skylar hatred was its purest symptom, a rage aimed at a character whose only real crime was refusing to enjoy Walter White as much as we did. And here's what makes Breaking Bad remarkable, rather than just unlucky in its fans, which is that the show knew, and you can watch it learn. Season 3 hands Skylar her most despised moment, 3 words delivered flat across a kitchen, an affair confessed as a weapon, and the scene is built to be a blow against Walt that the audience receives instead as a crime against him. The show is measuring us. By season 5, it stops being subtle about the results, giving Skylar a scene where she stands by a pool with a cigarette in her hand and tells Walt she has no plan, no move, and nothing left except to wait for the cancer to come back. The line horrifies Walt, and it's meant to horrify us too, since this is a woman so trapped that her husband's death has become the only exit she can imagine. The show pauses there, offering the audience one last clean chance to see the marriage from inside the other chair, and plenty of viewers still called her ungrateful. There's a version of this section that stays clinical, but it shouldn't, because the people involved didn't get to experience it clinically. Gunn wrote about the toll of realizing that fury at a fictional woman could attach itself to her body, her name and her public life, while Gilligan, for his part, sounded genuinely bewildered in interviews, saying he'd built Skylar as sympathetic and couldn't fully account for the loathing. The man who designed the machine was unsettled by what the machine produced, which might be the most honest summary of Breaking Bad's legacy. Even its creator underestimated how well it worked. The hatred of Skylar White is not a footnote about toxic fandom, it's the experiment's result printed in public, because the show aligned us with Walt, gave us a character whose function was to see him clearly, and a measurable portion of the audience responded by hating clarity itself. She doesn't understand him. That was the third defense, and notice whose voice it's in, because it isn't the show's. It's his, and by now it's ours. Let's solve a problem together. Season 1, and there is a man chained by the neck to a pole in a basement. His name is Domingo. They call him Crazy 8, and he is a drug distributor who has already tried to kill Walt once. Walt has spent days feeding him sandwiches, learning his story and cutting the crusts off the bread, all while looking for a reason to let him go. So let's look for one with him. And actually, Walt makes it easy because he takes a legal pad and draws a line down the middle. On one side, he lists reasons to let him live, and the list fills up. It's the moral thing to do. There are Judeo-Christian principles to consider. You are not a murderer. There's the sanctity of life, and murder is wrong. The column runs long, and every entry is true. On the other side, reasons to kill him, and there's one entry. He'll kill your entire family if you let him go. Now be honest about the arithmetic, because the show is asking you to do it. Crazy 8 is not an innocent, since he's a drug distributor who has already tried to kill Walt once and appears entirely willing to do it again. If Walt releases him, what happens, given that he knows Walt's name and he knows Jesse? There is no police option, because going to the police means prison, means Skylar alone, means the baby born with her father in handcuffs, and there's no payoff option either, because money doesn't erase a witness. Walk it forward the way Walt does, branch by branch, and every path out of that basement that leaves Domingo breathing appears to end with him coming back for Walt or his family. One column has 15 true sentences, and the other column has the only sentence that decides. He has to. Okay, stop, and look at what just happened, at what I just did, and what you may have just done along with me. Every step of that reasoning felt sound, and most of it, locally, was, yet the conclusion is a man strangled with a bike lock in a basement. That's the trick, and I want to name it precisely because it is the load-bearing trick of the entire series. Walt logic is good logic inside a frame Walt drew. It isn't madness, and it isn't bloodlust. It's careful, situational, step-by-step reasoning where every step is locally sound and the destination is monstrous, because the monstrousness lives in the frame itself, in the options crossed off before the list ever began. No police, no confession, no flight, and no version of events where Walt gives up what the basement protects. We accepted those exclusions without noticing them, because he did. The frame remains the crime even after Crazy 8 proves Walt's fear was justified, even after the missing shard of plate confirms that Domingo means to attack him, because the shard confirms danger without confirming that Walt exhausted every lawful possibility before chaining a man to a pole. Walt enters that basement only after choosing the meth business, after killing Emilio and dissolving his body, and after deciding that confession is unavailable because confession would cost him everything he's just started to build. The legal pad begins too late, and it treats the consequences of Walt's first decisions as permanent laws of nature, with his freedom and his secret and his project silently defined as non-negotiable, so that Domingo's life becomes the only variable left on the table. The show doesn't ask you to approve of murder, it asks you to check the math, and the math checks. Inside the frame. The frame is the crime. What I just performed on you, walking the branches and feeling the walls close and arriving at he has to, as if it were arithmetic, is what Breaking Bad does structurally for 5 years. 60 small problems, each with a locally reasonable answer, arranged into a ladder. And a ladder works because you only ever climb one rung at a time. So let's look at the rungs. Crazy 8 was self-defense, basically, since he'd have killed them all, and we did the math together. Jane was built around omission, though even the omission is dirtier than Walt wants it to look, and dirtier than most of us remember it. She falls asleep on her side, and it's Walt, shaking Jesse to wake him, who causes her to roll onto her back, and when she begins to choke, he understands exactly what is happening, and chooses not to correct a danger he helped create. His hand even starts toward her before it stops. But watch what memory does with that scene, because if you ask people about it, years later they'll tell you, he just stood there and didn't do anything. The audience edits out the shake, the same way Walt would, because the defense is so much easier to build from pure passivity, so the show gave us a crime with his fingerprints on it, and we remembered it wiped clean. The plane crash, all 167 people, arrives half a season's worth of grief later. And by then it's been laundered through so many intermediate causes, the grieving father and the air traffic control, that calling it Walt's feels almost unfair. Notice the timing there, because in this show, the bill never arrives with the meal. Consequences come late and detached from their causes, so that by the time the payment lands, you've already forgiven the purchase. The delay isn't pacing, it's anesthesia. Gail Botticher was killed without Walt pulling the trigger, since a broken kid does it, weeping on his orders, and the defense practically pre-installs itself. It was Gail or Walt. Gus had made the swap explicit, and anyway Jesse fired the gun. Brock was a child, poisoned by Walt as a chess move to turn Jesse against Gus, and here the ladder reveals how high we've climbed, because the defense that circulated, the one that maybe you reached for, was that he calculated the dose and the child lived. Season 1 us would stare at Season 4 us in horror, because he poisoned a child and we graded the poisoning on precision. Then there's Mike and the 10 coordinated prison murders carried out in a 2-minute montage set to a jaunty tune, and Todd and Jack's crew and Hank in a hole in the desert that Walt dug money into. By the top of the ladder, the defences have gone threadbare and you can hear them straining, but the climb itself did the work, because nobody watches episode 1 and cheers a child poisoner. The show never asked us to make that leap. It asked for 60 small steps, each one padded with a reason, and each one just one rung above the last one you'd already accepted. Acceptance rolls downhill, since every yes makes the next yes cheaper. Because refusing rung 40 means admitting something about the 39 beneath your feet. That's not how a story corrupts a character. That's how it corrupts an audience. It's for his family. That was the 4th defense, and if you say it out loud now, this high up the ladder, with Hank in the ground and a child in a hospital bed, you can hear how it sounds. It was always going to sound like this. We just needed the altitude. The finale of Breaking Bad gives Walter White many gifts, including a working plan, a dignified death among the steel he loved, and revenge tied with a bow, but its greatest gift is one honest sentence, and that sentence is the end of this argument. He comes to Skylar one last time, and she braces for it, and so do we, because we've heard the speech 50 times and can recite it in our sleep. Everything I did for the family. She even starts to say it for him, the way you'd finish a drunk story, and he stops her. I did it for me, I liked it, I was good at it, and I was alive. Notice what this confession is not, because it isn't new information. Nothing in the sentence would surprise anyone who watched the show with clear eyes, since the liking and the pride and the aliveness have been on screen since a man in the pilot said, "I am awake." What's new is only that Walt stops paying the cost of denying it, because the empire is ash, the family is gone, and the cancer is finishing its work. So honesty is the last luxury he can afford, and he treats himself to it. He is finally saying out loud the thing the show has been displaying for 5 seasons, the thing we should have recognized long before he did. Which is why the sentence isn't really aimed at him. It's aimed at everyone who spent 5 seasons saying the other thing on his behalf. Here's the part worth being exact about, though, because it's not that the show never supplied Walt's defense. It did, constantly, in his own mouth, since everything I do, I do. For this family is practically the series' chorus. But listen to who says it. Because it's Walt, almost only ever Walt. The show hands him the language, and then almost never lets a trustworthy character certify it. Since Skylar doesn't buy it, Jesse stops buying it, and Mike laughs it out of the room. The words were provided, but the believing was outsourced, so we took a defendant's self-serving testimony and did the work of making it credible, in the dark, unprompted, exactly the way I argued for him while Jane died. And now, in the last hour, the defendant himself stands up, looks past his wife, and withdraws the plea we spent 5 seasons entering for him. So the transformation Gilligan promised turns out to be 2 transformations running in parallel and feeding each other. On screen, there's a man whose nature holds steady while his capacity to act on it grows, with every season enlarging what the pilot planted, turning pride into empire and grievance into bodies. In front of the screen, there's an audience growing equally practiced, season by season, at translating each enlargement into necessity. He got better at doing it, and we got better at excusing it, and the finale hands us the receipt. And even here, even in the hour of judgment, watch how gently the machine handles its favourite. There are readings of the finale, serious ones, that call it Walt's dying fantasy, since everything goes too right, the keys fall too neatly, and the man walks unseen through a country hunting his face. But you don't need the fantasy reading to see the tenderness, because the camera lays him down in a meth lab like a cathedral and drifts up from his body to the skylight, while a love song plays, a song about a special love and chemistry between 2 people, granting him what it granted him from the pilot onward. The final word, the framing rights, and death on his own terms. Some critics were angry about that ending, calling it too clean, too kind, and too much on Walt's side, and they were right about the description, while being wrong about the meaning, because a show that judged Walt for us in the end would have let us off the ladder. This one doesn't, since it stays seductive to the last frame, keeps the lens loving, and plays the romance out over the corpse. And then it leaves us alone with what we felt. Satisfied, if we're being honest, because for many of us that ending felt good. He won on his terms, and it felt like resolution rather than a criminal dying on a floor. The proof of everything in this video isn't in the finale, it's in how much we liked it. So let's go back to that bedroom in Albuquerque near the end of the 2nd season, where a young woman is dying and Walter White is watching, and in the dark of my own room, uninvited, I am building his defense. He had to. Nobody wrote me that line, since it isn't in the script. It's the line the entire machine exists to produce, built by the camera that lent me his eyes, the structure that made his secrets mine to keep, and the ladder that had already sold me the first 3 rungs at a discount. The show did everything except say it, and it saved the saying for me. That's the real answer to how Breaking Bad turned its audience into Walter White. It didn't do it by hiding his evil, because it showed us everything, every body and every lie, in high definition. It simply understood something uncomfortable about the person on the couch, which is that pride is not rare, that grievance is not rare, and that the fantasy of finally being paid what you're owed sleeps in more or less everyone, waiting for its permission slip. Walt's was a diagnosis, and ours was a television show. Chips to Scarface, so Gilligan kept his promise after all, and he kept it twice. Once on screen, where a man's oldest hungers were fed until they filled the frame, and once in the dark, one forgiveness at a time, at eye level with the screen, in us. Jane is dying, and it takes about a minute. He stood there, and he watched, and so did we.